It was a Tuesday in October, and Nadia had been sitting on the same bench for 40 minutes, and she was not sure she could stand up yet. Not physically. Physically, she was fine. She was 34 years old and healthy, and there was nothing wrong with her legs. It was the other thing. The other thing was that this particular bench, in this particular park, on this particular stretch of path between the north entrance and the small pond that froze every January and thawed every March, was where she and her mother used to walk on Sunday mornings. Every Sunday morning, for 11 years, from the time Nadia moved to this city at 23 until the spring her mother got sick, and then through the sick years too, on the Sundays when her mother was well enough, which became fewer, and then very few, and then none. Her mother had been gone for 14 months. Everyone who loved Nadia had been, in their various ways, and with their genuine love and their genuine limitations, telling her for about 6 of those months that she was doing so well, that her mother would be proud. That time helps. That she should be kind to herself, whatever that meant, and that it was okay to feel sad and also okay to feel okay, and that the grief would not always be this loud. Nadia had nodded at all of it. The grief was still this loud. Not every day. That part was true. It was not every day anymore. It arrived in ambushes now rather than as a constant weather system. A Sunday morning, a particular smell. The specific quality of October light in this park, which was the same light that had been here every October of those 11 years of Sunday mornings, and which her body had apparently stored as a reference point for her mother's presence so precisely that stepping into it felt each time like stepping into a room where her mother had just been. She had walked into the park this morning intending to reclaim it. That was the word she had used to herself. Reclaim. She had read somewhere that grief counselors sometimes encourage this, returning to places, rewriting the emotional memory, making new associations. She had gotten as far as the bench. She had sat down. 40 minutes had passed. She was watching the pond, and she was not crying, which felt both like progress and like a lie, and she was thinking about the specific way her mother used to say her name. Not Nadia, the way everyone else said it, but with a particular warmth wrapped around the first syllable. A sound that belonged entirely to her mother and to no one else. That she had not, until her mother was gone, understood was something she needed to hold on to. She had not held on to it. She had not known to. That was the sharpest part of loss that no one told you about before you were inside it. Not the missing, the not knowing before what to store. The man sat down at the other end of the bench the way people sit on public benches, with the implicit negotiation of shared space, leaving the appropriate distance, not making it a thing. He had a coffee. He was somewhere in his mid-40s. He had the look of someone who was also here deliberately, and also finding it harder than anticipated. They sat in silence for a while. This was normal. Bench silence is its own social contract. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. He declined the call. He said, to no one in particular and perhaps to himself, "Not today." Nadia did not mean to respond. The response came before she decided to make it. The way things come when you have been sitting alone with something for 40 minutes and a human voice, any human voice, breaks the surface of it. She said, "Someone you are avoiding." He looked at her, not startled. He had registered her presence the way you register the presence of another person on a bench, peripherally, without making it a point of attention. Now he looked at her directly, and she saw, in the half-second before his expression settled into the polite neutrality of a stranger, something she recognized. Not grief exactly. The shape grief leaves on a face when it has been there long enough to become structural. He said, "My brother. He means well." "Us," she said. "They always do." He looked back at the pond. She looked back at the pond. Another silence, different texture from the first one. He said, "You have been here a while." She said, 40-something minutes. "I came to reclaim the place. It is not going as planned." He said, "Reclaim it from what?" She said, "From what it used to be. From who I used to be here with." He did not say he was sorry. She noticed that. Most people, when she gave them that sentence, said they were sorry in the automatic way of people filling a social gap. He did not fill it. He let it be what it was. She said, "My mother. She has been gone 14 months. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My son. 2 years in March." The words fell between them on the bench, and neither of them moved. It's because there is a hierarchy to grief that no one talks about openly, but that everyone who has been inside it understands. Not a hierarchy of worth. No loss is more valid than another. A hierarchy of language, of how much the world around you is equipped to hold what you are carrying. Nadia had lost her mother, and the world had held that. Imperfectly, on a schedule, with a lot of well-meaning misdirection. But it had held it. There were frameworks. There were words. There was a shape to it that the people around her could recognize and respond to, even if their responses sometimes landed wrong. Eric had lost his son. There is almost no framework for that. There is almost no language. There is a word, bereaved parent, that people avoid saying because saying it requires acknowledging that this is a category of human experience that exists, that someone has to inhabit it, and that the someone inhabiting it is sitting in front of you on a bench in October, and there is nothing you can do, and that helplessness is so total that most people, most of the time, do the only thing available to them. They look away. Nadia did not look away. She said, "How old?" He said, 7. She said, "What was his name?" And Eric, who had not said his son's name to a stranger in 2 years, who had learned in the months after the funeral that saying the name in public produced in the people around him a particular helpless flinching that he had come to protect them from by simply not saying it, who had internalized the protection so thoroughly that he had started to feel in his darkest hours that his son was becoming unspeakable, was becoming a silence rather than a person, said, "Lucas." Nadia said the name back to him, not as a question, not as a confirmation. Just, "Lucas, the way you say a name when you want the person who gave it to know that you received it, that it landed, that it is now something you are holding carefully." Eric looked at her. She said, "Tell me something about him. One thing, whatever comes first." He said, "I do not," and stopped. She waited. He said, "I do not usually talk about him to strangers." She said, "I know. You can anyway." The thing about Nadia was this. She had grown up in a house where the dead were not absent, where her grandmother, gone before Nadia was born, was present at the dinner table in the stories her mother told, where the Day of the Dead was not a performance of grief, but an honest continuation of relationship. The understanding, lived and practiced and passed down, that love does not require the physical presence of its object to remain real and active and in need of tending. She did not believe the dead were gone. She believed they were elsewhere. And she had spent 14 months talking to her mother, in the park, in the kitchen, in the car, in the specific ongoing conversation that her culture had taught her was not delusion, but loyalty. And the thing she had discovered was that the talking was not for her mother. It was for her. It was the way she kept the connection real, the way she refused to let her mother become a silence. She looked at Eric. This quiet man with his cold coffee and his declined phone call, and his 2 years of carrying a name he had learned not to say. And she understood, with the specific clarity of one griever recognizing another, what had been done to him. Not by cruelty, by the well-meaning architecture of a culture that had given him no vessel for this, that had offered him stoicism as a virtue and privacy as dignity and the forward motion of getting through it as the only available path, and that had not told him, or had told him in ways he could not hear, that grief without witness does not resolve. It calcifies. It becomes the thing you carry alone until the carrying is all you are doing. He told her one thing about Lucas. He said he was afraid of nothing except silence. He could not stand a quiet room. He always had to be making some kind of sound, singing, talking, asking questions. My wife used to say he came out of the womb ready to argue. He stopped. Something moved across his face. Nadia said, "He sounds like someone who took up exactly the right amount of space." Eric said, "He took up all of it. Every room he was in. You felt it when he left a room, before he..." And he stopped again, and this time the stopping was different. Was the stopping of a man who has arrived at the edge of something and is deciding in real time whether to step back or step forward. He stepped forward. He said, "You felt it when he left a room, and then he left every room, and I have not known what to do with the quiet since." Nadia was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone who did not know what to say. The silence of someone who was making room for what had just been said to be what it was, without immediately covering it with a response. Then she said, "My mother used to hum. Not songs exactly, just sounds. While she cooked, while she cleaned, while she walked. This specific sound that I did not register as a sound until it was gone, and the kitchen was just a kitchen, and I realized I had been measuring the safety of rooms by whether she was in them." Eric said, "Yes, just that. Yes, the word of someone who understands exactly." She said, "I talk to her still. I know how that sounds." He said, "It does not sound strange." She said, "Most people think it does." He said, "Most people have not lost someone the way we have lost someone. The we was not planned." She heard it, and she thought he heard it too. The slight surprise of it, at the way it arrived before either of them had decided to be a we. The way grief sometimes collapses the distance between strangers faster than years of ordinary acquaintance. She said, "Do you talk to him?" A long pause. He said, "I do not know how." She said, "You just did." They stayed on the bench for another hour, not talking continuously, not performing connection. Talking the way people talk when they have found, unexpectedly and without planning for it, someone who can hold what they are carrying without flinching, in intervals, with silences between that were not empty but full. The kind of silences that happen when two people are both thinking about the same kind of thing from different angles. He told her about the last, ordinary day. The Tuesday before, always a Tuesday. As grief has a thing about Tuesdays. When Lucas had breakfast and argued about whether he needed a coat and did not need a coat, it turned out, because the day was warmer than forecast, and Eric had said, "You see, you were right," and Lucas had said, "I am always right, Papa," with the absolute unironic confidence of a 7-year-old, and that had been the last time Eric had laughed the real kind of laugh, the kind that comes from your chest, before the world rearranged itself into the thing it became 3 days later. He had not told anyone that story. He had told the facts, the accident, the hospital, the days that followed. Because the facts were what people asked for when they asked what happened. No one had asked about the coat. Nadia asked about the coat. She said, "He was right about the coat, and he knew it, and he told you so." Eric said, "He told me so." She said, "That is a good last thing to have been." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "I had not thought of it that way." She said, "We do not usually get to choose the last ordinary thing. But if you have to have one, being right, and knowing it, and saying so at 7 years old, that is a good one." She told him about the name, the way her mother said it. The warmth wrapped around the first syllable that no one else had ever replicated. She said, "I did not record her voice. I have videos, but in the videos, she is always talking to someone else, and you can hear her voice, but not directed at me, not saying my name. And I have been trying for 14 months to remember exactly how it sounded, and I cannot get it exactly. It is close, but not exact. And the not exactness is its own kind of loss inside the loss." Eric said, "I know what you mean. I have been trying to remember the specific weight of him when I carried him." He was small for his age, but he felt solid, certain, like carrying something that was entirely sure of itself. "I cannot get that back exactly either." She said, "The body forgets before the heart does." He said, "Yes." She said, "My grandmother, my mother's mother, gone before I was born. My mother talked about her every week, set a place for her at Christmas, told me her stories until I felt I knew her. And when my mother got sick, I used to think, she is going to go to her mother. She has been missing her mother for 40 years, and now she is going to her." She paused. She said, "I do not know if I believe that. I do not know if it is true. But I believe my mother believed it, and on the bad days, that is enough." Eric said, "I want to believe something like that." She said, "What stops you?" He said, "I was not raised to." She said, "What were you raised to believe?" He thought about it for a long time. He said, "That you endure, that you do not make your pain someone else's burden, that the dignified thing is to carry it quietly and keep going." She said, "And has that worked?" He said, "I have kept going." She said, "That is not what I asked." He said, "No, it has not worked. I have kept going, and the grief has kept going alongside me, and I have not known how to put them in the same room together. I have been keeping them in separate rooms for 2 years, and it is exhausting in a way I cannot explain to anyone because the people around me think the separate rooms are the healthy arrangement." She said, "The separate rooms are not the healthy arrangement." He said, "I am beginning to understand that." She said, "In my family, we do not separate them, the grief and the living. We put them at the same table. We talk to the people we have lost as though they are still part of the conversation, because they are still part of the conversation. The conversation does not end because one person stops being physically present for it." He said, "That sounds—" He paused, searching for the honest word. "That sounds like something I do not know how to do, but that I think I need to learn." She said, "It is not complicated. You just told me about the coat. You just said his name to a stranger in a park. That is the beginning of it. That is what it looks like at the start." He said, "It does not feel like enough." She said, "It never does at the start. But the start is the only place it can begin." The coffee he had brought was long cold. Neither of them had looked at a phone. The light in the park had shifted in the way October light shifts in the mid-afternoon, going from sharp to soft. And the pond had changed color, the way ponds change color when the angle of the sun changes, and around them the park had continued its ordinary life. Joggers, dogs, a child throwing bread at the ducks with the focused intensity of a small person doing important work. And none of it had interrupted them, because they had been inside something that the ordinary world had, for this hour, arranged itself around. Eric said, "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Do you feel him, your mother, when you are here?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She said, "I feel the place where she was," which is different from feeling her. But the place where she was is specific enough that some days it is almost the same thing. He said, "I feel the quiet he left," which I know sounds like the opposite. She said, "It is not it is the exact shape of him, made of absence. That is not nothing. That is enormous." Eric said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had changed register in the way voices change register when something has moved through a person and rearranged something inside them. Not dramatically, not visibly, but actually. He said, "I have not talked about him like this, ever, since it happened. I have talked about what happened. I have not talked about him." She said, "I know." He said, "How did you know to ask about the coat?" She said, "Because the coat was him. The accident was something that happened to him. They are not the same thing, and the world keeps asking about the accident." They did not exchange numbers when they left. This is the part of the story that the version people want would change. The version that wants a clean resolution, an ongoing friendship, a relationship that carries forward and becomes the visible proof that the encounter meant something. But that is not what this was. What this was, what it had been, from the moment Eric sat down at the other end of the bench to the moment they stood and said goodbye, with the particular warmth of two people who have shared something real in a compressed amount of time and know they are unlikely to see each other again, was a bridge. Not between them permanently, between each of them and the thing they had been unable to approach alone. Nadia walked out of the park at 3:47 in the afternoon. She walked the path she and her mother used to walk. She walked it slowly. She talked to her mother as she walked, not performing it, not announcing it, with just the ongoing conversation, the one that had no scheduled end. And at the place where they used to stop and watch the ducks, she stopped and watched the ducks and said, "I met someone today. He lost his son. He did not know how to talk about it. I showed him what I could." She paused. She said, "I think you would have liked him. He listens the way you always said people should listen, like the other person's words are worth the space they take up." She stood there for a while. Then she walked home. Not lighter exactly. Grief does not lift on a Tuesday afternoon in October after one conversation on a bench, but different. The weight of it distributed differently. The way a load shifts when you set it down briefly and pick it up again, and your body has had a moment to remember it knows how to carry things. She had been seen carrying it. That changed something. Not everything. Something. Eric drove home in the early dark of an October evening and sat in his car in the driveway for a long time. His house was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 2 years. The specific quiet of a house that used to contain a child who could not stand a quiet room and that had, since losing him, become the thing Lucas would have found most intolerable. Eric had lived inside that irony for 2 years without having the language for it. He had it now. A stranger in a park had given him the language for it in the space of an afternoon. He sat in the car. Then he did something he had not done in 2 years. He said, "Lucas," out loud, in the dark car in the driveway, with no one to flinch, with no one to protect from the name or from what the name cost him to say, or from the silence that followed it. He said, "You were right about the coat." He sat there. The quiet did not go away. He had not expected it to. But inside the quiet, something had shifted. A hairline fracture in the wall he had built around the grief, so small it was barely visible. But a fracture is not nothing. A fracture is the beginning of something. He did not know yet what it was the beginning of. He suspected it would take a long time to find out, and that the finding out would not be linear, and would not always feel like progress, and would require him to keep saying the name in rooms where he had taught himself not to say it. He thought he might be able to do that now. He was not certain. He was not going to pretend he was certain. But he thought he might. There is a specific kind of healing that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a diagnosis or a prescription or a protocol or a before and after photograph. It does not happen in a clinic or a session or a structured intervention. It does not produce a moment dramatic enough to film. It happens on a bench in October when a stranger declines a phone call and another stranger, who has been sitting alone with something too heavy to carry, hears a human voice and says something before deciding to. It happens when someone asks about the coat instead of the accident. When someone says a name back to you so you know it was received. When someone sits with the weight of what you are carrying long enough that you remember your arms were not made to carry it alone. The world has a tendency to root grief through the medical, to hand it a timeline and a framework and a checklist of stages and a recommendation for professional support, all of which have their place and none of which are the whole answer, because the whole answer is not clinical. The whole answer is older than any framework. It is witness. It is one person saying to another, "I see what you are carrying. I am not going to look away from it. I am not going to tell you how long you are allowed to carry it, or what the correct method of carrying is. I am simply going to sit here with you while you carry it and let that be enough." That is not nothing. It is, on certain Tuesday afternoons in October, everything. Nadia never went back to the park to reclaim it. She went back because it was hers, because it had been hers for 11 years, and it was still hers, and her mother was in it the way her mother was in every place they had ever been together. Not as a ghost, not as an absence, but as a permanent presence in the specific texture of the place, woven into the light and the path and the pond that froze every January and thawed every March. She stopped trying to reclaim it from her grief. She let the grief be part of it. She let her mother be part of it. She walked the path on Sunday mornings the way she always had, with the ongoing conversation continuing the way it always would, and she let the grief and the living sit at the same table the way her family had always taught her they should. It did not stop hurting. She had stopped expecting it to. Eric called his brother back the following evening. Not because he was ready. Because readiness, he was beginning to understand, was not the precondition for doing the necessary thing. The necessary thing was the precondition for readiness. His brother answered on the second ring in the slightly careful way of someone who has been worried about you for a long time and has learned to hold that worry gently so as not to make you feel the weight of it. Eric said, "I want to talk about Lucas." His brother was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been waiting for you to say that." Eric said, "I know. I am sorry it took this long." His brother said, "Do not be sorry, just talk." And Eric, who had been raised to endure, to contain, to carry it quietly and keep going, who had built 2 years of dignified silence around the most undignified pain of his life, talked. Not fluently, not linearly, not in the polished way of someone who has processed a thing and is now reporting on it from a safe distance. In the halting, circling, sometimes stopping way of someone who is doing it for the first time in real time, with the full weight of it still present and no guarantee of what comes next. He talked about the coat. His brother laughed. The real kind. The kind that comes from the chest. He said, of course he was right about the coat. Eric said, he was always right. His brother said, he was insufferable about it. Eric said, yes. They talked for 2 hours. This is not a story about two people who met on a bench and saved each other. It is a story about what becomes possible when one person decides, for no strategic reason, and at no particular moment that was set up for it, to ask about the coat instead of the accident. To say the name back so the other person knows it landed. To stay in the weight of what someone else is carrying long enough that they remember they do not have to carry it entirely alone. Those are not grand gestures. They do not require training or expertise or the right credentials or the correct framework. They require only the decision, made in real time, without preparation, on an ordinary Tuesday in October, to not look away. Most of us have that decision available to us more often than we use it. The bench is closer than you think. The person at the other end of it is already there. All that is required is to sit down and ask about the coat. Think about the person who has asked about your coat, who wanted the real thing instead of the facts, who said your name or someone else's name back to you so you knew it was received and held carefully. Write something about them in the comments, one true thing, because the comments on this video are going to become something worth reading, and they deserve to be named, even here, even just by you.